So we need to talk about Jane Eyre. And I know what you're probably thinking. You know, you're picturing the bonnets, the brooding guy in a cravat staring out a rainy window.
Gothic romance. Capital G, capital R.
Exactly. Gothic romance.
Which is, you know, it's fair. That is, the box culture has put it in for, what, 170 years now?
Yeah.
It's the classic moody love story.
Right. But we have this really fascinating breakdown of the audiobook experience in front of us. And it basically argues that if you label Jane Eyre as just a romance, you are fundamentally misreading the book.
Or mislistening, I guess.
Or mislistening, yeah. The review says this isn't a story about a girl finding a husband at all. It's a survival guide.
It really is. I mean, the source material makes a very strong case that the romance is actually, it's secondary. The real engine of the whole story is dignity. It's about moral autonomy. It's about a woman in 1847 refusing to be digested by the people around her.
Refusing to be digested. That is such a vivid way to put it.
Isn't it?
Because that's the twist, right? We think of these Victorian heroines as sort of swooning and passive, just waiting for a rich guy to come and save them. But the Jane described here is, she's tough. She's iron.
She has to be. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, I think. We're not just looking at the plot. We're looking at how the specific medium of an audiobook, just the act of listening to her voice, it shifts our whole perspective.
Yeah.
It kind of strips away that layer of dusty classic literature and makes it feel like a contemporary confession.
So our mission today is to unpack that. We're going to look at why this quiet character is actually one of the most radical figures in literature. We'll break down these 3 pillars of independence that the source identifies.
We had to figure out why this specific format makes the story hit so much harder than just, you know, reading the text on a page.
Exactly.
And I think we should start right where the review starts, with the character herself. Because if you don't get who Jane is before she meets Mr. Rochester, none of the rest of it makes sense.
Okay, yeah. The review maps out her trajectory, and honestly, it's brutal.
It's so bleak.
We tend to just glaze over the childhood part to get to the romance, but the source really emphasizes that Jane is forged in fire. She's an unloved orphan, treated like a parasite by her own aunt.
And then she gets shipped off to Lowood, which is basically a starvation camp that's pretending to be a school.
Right.
And the key insight from this analysis is that all this trauma, it doesn't break her. It creates this intense internal steadiness. The review uses that word a lot. Steady.
Which is so interesting because usually when we think of a strong female lead today, we think of someone messy.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone who screams, throws things, breaks all the rules very loudly, main character energy.
Right, the Fleabag archetype.
Yeah.
You know, high highs, very low lows.
Yeah.
But the source argues Jane's power comes from the complete opposite direction.
Yeah.
She isn't dramatic. She doesn't scream. She observes. She holds herself together when literally everyone else is falling apart.
There's a line in these notes that I keep coming back to it. She fights for emotional and intellectual equality. That's a very specific way to phrase it. It's not just fighting for rights. It's fighting to be seen as a brain and a soul, not just a body or, you know, a servant.
And that is the perfect setup for when she finally arrives at Thornfield Hall.
Right.
This is where the plot kicks into gear, obviously.
Yeah.
She meets Mr. Rochester.
Yeah.
But the review makes this crucial point. The tension isn't just sexual or romantic. It's a power struggle.
That brings us to the core thesis of this deep dive, the central conflict. The notes frame this as love versus autonomy. Now, I want to push back on this a little bit just to play devil's advocate. Isn't that a false dichotomy? I mean, can't you have both, especially in a romance novel?
In a modern context, yeah, sure. But you have to remember, this is 1847.
Okay.
The source reminds us of the legal and social reality. Women were, for all intents and purposes, property, first of their fathers, then of their husbands. There was no both. If you married, you literally ceased to exist as a legal person.
Right, the coverture loss. You became one person, and that person was the husband.
Exactly. So when Jane falls for Rochester, the stakes they're existential. And the source breaks her resistance down into these 3 specific pillars of independence that she just refuses to compromise on.
Okay, let's do it. The first one listed here is emotional equality.
Right. So this is her refusal to be condescended to. Rochester is rich, he's older, he's worldly, and he tries to play these little games with her, tries to make her jealous, tries to treat her like a pet or some distinct curiosity.
And she just doesn't play along.
She doesn't play along. She demands to be spoken to as a peer.
Which is just incredibly bold for a governess speaking to her employer. It's like an employee demanding the CEO treat her like a partner.
Precisely. The second pillar is financial independence. And this is the one that I think modern readers sometimes we underestimate it.
Because today we just take it for granted that women can have their own bank accounts.
Right. But the source highlights how Jane is just terrified of being kept. There's a scene it talks about where Rochester tries to buy her all these expensive clothes and jewels before the wedding. And Jane feels physically sick. She feels like she's being dressed up like a doll.
It's the pretty woman problem, but without the fun shopping montage.
Exactly. She realizes that if he pays for everything, he owns everything, including her.
Wow, okay.
And that leads to the third and most important pillar, moral autonomy. This is the big one.
Yeah.
This is why she leaves him.
Okay, let's dig into this. Because in the book, she finds out Rochester is already married. He has a wife locked up in the attic, which we will get to that.
Oh, we will.
But he begs Jane to stay. He says, we love each other. Who cares what society thinks? Let's just live together.
And looking at that with modern eyes, you might just be screaming at the book, just do it. He loves you. The wife is dangerous and violent. It's a tragic situation.
Exactly. It feels so rigid of her to say no. It feels like she's choosing a rule book over a person.
But the source argues it's not about the rule book. It's not about religious dogma. It's about self-preservation. The analysis asks the question, can love exist without equality? If Jane agrees to be his mistress, she becomes totally dependent on his whim. She loses her standing. She loses her ability to ever walk away.
So when she leaves him, she's not doing it to be a good girl for the church. She's doing it because she knows that if she stays, the Jane part of her will just dissolve.
She chooses principle over passion. And the review argues this is the most modern thing about her. She says, I care for myself. The more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself.
That is a killer quote. I care for myself. It's radical self-love, but not in the, hashtag bath bomb way.
No.
It's in the I will not let you destroy me way.
And that is why the source calls it a survival story. She walks out of a warm house into the freezing moors with no money, no food, risking death, rather than risk the death of her integrity.
It really does recontextualize the whole romance label.
Doubly.
But we can't talk about Jane Eyre without talking about the vibes, the atmosphere, because the source spends a lot of time on Thornfield Hall as a character in its own right.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the Gothic element really comes in. The review describes the setting not just as a backdrop, but as this living, breathing antagonist.
It mentions the dark corridors, the strange laughter.
The laughter is key. In the book, it's creepy, but the review emphasizes that in the audiobook, it's terrifying. It creates this whole sonic landscape of secrets.
Yeah.
You have the candlelit intimacy of the drawing room, and then just above their heads, this chaotic, violent secret locked away in the attic.
And then the source calls the audiobook experience cinematic.
Which is an interesting word for audio.
It is, but it implies immersion, right? When you're reading, you can kind of skim the descriptions of the drapes or the wind howling.
Sure.
But the narrator forces you to sit in it. You hear the silence between the words. You feel the isolation. That isolation connects to the broader social critique, doesn't it? Thornfield feels like this isolated island, but it's still connected to this very rigid Victorian world. The source mentions that the book is critiquing class, gender, religion.
It is. But what's so fascinating is how Jane resists that world. The review notes that her resistance is quiet.
Quiet resistance. I marked that too.
It's not a loud rebellion. She doesn't try to burn down the patriarchy with a big speech. She just refuses to comply. There's a moment where a religious figure, St. John Rivers, tries to pressure her into a loveless marriage for duty, and she just holds her ground. She's immovable.
It reminds me of Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener. I would prefer not to.
Exactly. But with so much more emotional depth. I will not. There is just immense power in a woman in 1847 simply saying, I will not, when every single authority figure is telling her, you must.
So let's pivot to the medium itself. We've touched on it, but the review makes a really specific claim here. It says that Jane Eyre works better as an audiobook than almost any other classic.
It's a bold claim.
It's a very bold claim.
It all comes down to the narrative style.
Yeah.
The book is written in the first person. Reader, I married him. It's an internal monologue.
So it feels like a confession.
Yes. The source says it feels like Jane is confessing her life story directly to you. It creates an intimacy that third-person novels like, say, Pride and Prejudice don't quite have. When you hear the narrator's voice, you are inside Jane's head. You aren't observing her, you are her.
Okay, but what about the language? Because, let's be real, Victorian prose can be dense.
Sure.
You know, sentences that go on for an entire paragraph. Does that really translate well to audio?
The review argues that it actually flows better spoken than read. Victorian writers often wrote for the ear. They cared about rhythm, about cadence. The dense language becomes poetic when a skilled actor performs it. It starts being a hurdle and starts being music.
Okay, but we have to address the elephant in the room. The source brings up possible limitations. Specifically, the pacing.
It is slow. There is just no getting around that. If you are used to modern thrillers where there's a cliffhanger every 4 pages, this is going to feel like wading through molasses.
Right.
There are long sections of reflection, of descriptions of nature, of internal debate.
But the reviewer flips that, don't they? They argue the slowness is actually a feature, not a bug.
They do. They argue that the pacing forces you to slow down your own brain. It forces you to reflect with Jane. Instead of just rushing to the next plot point, you have to sort of simmer in the emotion.
Simmering is a great word for it. It amplifies the emotional weight.
That's the consensus. Because the narration is so quiet and restrained, it matches Jane's character. The moments of high emotion, they hit like a truck. You feel her loneliness more deeply because you spent 3 hours listening to her be alone.
It's the difference between hearing someone shout, "I'm lonely," across a crowded room versus someone whispering it directly into your ear.
Exactly. The whisper is unbearable.
So who is this for? We're kind of building a profile of the ideal listener here. The source gives it a 4.8 out of 5, which is huge. But they also have some caveats.
The profile is pretty clear. I mean, obviously, lovers of classic literature, if you like the Brontes, you're in.
Yeah.
But more broadly, it's for people interested in emotional maturity.
People interested in emotional maturity. That sounds like a dating app filter.
It should be. But seriously, it's for listeners who want to understand the complexity of integrity. It is not for people who want a fast-paced, plot-driven romp.
Right.
If you want Bridgerton, this might frustrate you. Bridgerton is the fantasy. Jane Eyre is the psychological reality.
So if you're looking for escapism, maybe look elsewhere. But if you're looking for what? Connection.
Connection, and maybe a bit of a challenge. The source suggests that this audiobook asks something of you. It asks you to witness a woman's struggle to remain whole.
It brings us back to that idea of strength. We talked about how we define strong characters, and I think this deep dive has really shifted my view on that.
Oh, yeah. In what way?
Well, we usually equate strength with action, doing things, changing things. But Jane's strength is almost entirely defensive. It's about boundaries. It's about drawing a line in the sand and just saying, you cannot cross this.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Jane Eyre teaches that the ultimate strength isn't conquering the world, it's conquering the urge to betray yourself.
Love is only meaningful when it respects your identity. That seems to be the bumper sticker here.
It is. If you have to dissolve to be loved, it's not love, it's consumption. And Rochester has to learn that lesson just as much as Jane does. He has to learn to love her as an equal, not as a possession.
And he pays a very heavy price to learn it.
He does indeed.
I want to end on the closing thought from the source material because I think it just sums up everything we've discussed. The reviewer writes, Jane didn't fight the world loudly. She simply refused to lose herself.
It's so deceptive in its simplicity, isn't it? Simply refused, as if that isn't the hardest thing in the world to do.
Yeah. Especially when the world is offering you everything you ever wanted, if you just compromise a little bit.
That's the temptation.
So here's the question I want to leave you with today. We live in a very loud era. Rebellion is loud, success is loud, identity is performed loudly, for an audience. But looking at Jane Eyre, a character from 1847, is there perhaps more power in the quiet no?
It makes you wonder if the strongest people aren't the ones posting about it, but the ones quietly holding the line in their own lives.
The ones refusing to be digested.
Exactly.
Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
Stay steady, everyone.